The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The situation in Kentucky involving County Clerk Kim Davis has gone from annoying to disturbing to flat out delusional and reminiscent of a complete lack of connection to the real world. I'll explain. If you've been following the story, Kim Davis is a county clerk in Kentucky's Rowan County. Immediately after the Supreme Court decision that state bans on same-sex marriage were not permissible, she started refusing gay couples marriage licenses. And eventually, through the appeal process, this escalated into her saying, we're just not going to do marriage licenses for anybody, period. The latest on this is that yesterday morning, a motion was filed to hold Kim Davis in contempt of court for refusing to obey any number of court orders against her for not providing marriage licenses, initially for same-sex couples, and ultimately just saying, hey, we're not doing marriage licenses at all here. As we know, Lewis, one of the just basic pieces of being a county clerk.
You got to do your job. Yeah. And she's completely unwilling to do that, even unwilling to do it for straight couples.
The Associated Press saying that Davis and her staff have been ordered by U.S. District Judge David Bunning to appear in federal court tomorrow morning, Thursday at 11 a.m. to explain themselves. Now, she has put out a statement, Kim Davis has, saying, quote, "In addition to my desire to serve the people of Rowan County, I owe my life to Jesus Christ, who loves me and gave his life for me. I am not perfect, no one is, but I am forgiven, and I love my Lord and must be obedient to him and to the word of God. To issue a marriage license which conflicts with God's definition of marriage with my name affixed to the certificate would violate my conscience. It is not a light issue for me. It is a heaven or hell decision. To me, this has never been a gay or lesbian issue. It is about marriage and God's word. It is a matter of religious liberty, which, as she says, is protected under the First Amendment, the Kentucky Constitution, and in the Kentucky Religious Freedom Restoration Act. How is this not mental illness? Believing that if you grant a marriage license, a civil marriage license to a gay couple, not a Christian or other religious endorsement of that, just the state exists, I recognize that the state exists, and thus, as an official of the state, I will sign off on this. How on earth would that lead to you ending up for eternity in the afterlife in a place called hell? How is that level of delusion not mental illness? Not that there's anything bad about mental illness. It's just that it should be treated as such, as opposed to some kind of moral stand for God for which she'll be seen as a martyr.
Well, maybe, but like we've talked about, it's tough when you are raised in a certain way and this stuff is drilled into you and you are essentially brainwashed. It may not be mental illness, but you just may not be able to snap out of it.
Let's not forget that there is huge money waiting for Kim Davis. I mean, an anti-gay pizza place that no one heard of, that had terrible pizza, raised like, what was it, $500,000 because they were anti-gay. This woman is way more of a hero to the bigoted right. She's actually preventing gay marriages from happening. The pizza place just wouldn't cater a gay marriage. The marriage would still be able to happen. Kim Davis is deliberately preventing same-sex marriages from happening. There could be millions of dollars waiting for her.
And unfortunately, I don't think that's an exaggeration at all. There also could be jail time waiting for her. And perhaps all of those legal fees and donations might not help at all. Hopefully they won't.
We will see ultimately what punishment there is. Some people have said jail time would be possible. Remember that she's an elected official, so there's no simple firing of Kim Davis. We are just now starting to look into what the process would be. And lastly, to put a fine point on Kim Davis's hypocrisy, not only has she never denied a formerly divorced person a marriage license, which would violate the same beliefs she claims inform her decision not to issue same-sex marriage licenses, according to WKYT, she has been married 4 times, violating her own religious beliefs. So we could not put a finer point on the bigoted hypocrisy of Kim Davis.
Yeah, I think that she's in one of these videos. You see someone asking her, how long have you been with someone? And
Yeah.
of course, she does not answer the question. Of course, another bigoted hypocrite. They're all the same.
I want to remind you that Lewis has often said on the program he thinks about 80% of people are incompetent at whatever it is they're doing, their job, raising children, social situations, just that there's about an 80% incompetence level in society, in the world. And I have some really, really disturbing data from a new PPP poll, which is going to support Lewis's hypothesis. Who is supporting Donald Trump was one of the questions the poll sought to answer. And it turns out that 2/3 of Donald Trump supporters believe that President Obama is a Muslim. Only 12% of Trump supporters admit that he is indeed a Christian. 61% of Donald Trump supporters don't think that President Obama was born in the United States. Now, if you say, well, it's just Donald Trump supporters. No, Donald Trump supporters seem particularly disconnected from reality, but the Republican Party, likely Republican primary voters are broadly speaking pretty disconnected from reality. 51% of the GOP electorate wants to eliminate birthright citizenship. 54% of the GOP electorate think President Obama is a Muslim, and only 29% of Republicans likely to vote Lewis believe that President Obama was born in the United States. Now, this is, if you're not sitting down, and Lewis, I'm glad you're sitting down, sit down for this piece of data. 29%, as I said, of the Republican electorate believes President Obama was born in the US. 40% of the Republican electorate believes that Ted Cruz was born in the United States. Ted Cruz admits he wasn't born in the United States, and still more likely Republican voters think that Ted Cruz was born here and that President Obama was not.
It's amazing. I think what this shows us more than anything is that we have a total failure here by the media to actually get us the correct information and
We
to report on
can't just blame the media, though. I agree, Lewis.
I know.
Corporate media has a lot of blame here, but we're dealing with idiots. I mean, we try to say, well, let's analyze the fragmentation of media delivery and discuss the idiosyncrasies of echo chamber. Whoa. Let's take a step back. We're dealing with fools here in great part.
We are dealing with people who have no desire to seek out information. Non-thinkers. We're dealing with non-thinkers.
Don't forget, Lewis, that a 2013 poll of Louisiana Republicans asked who was responsible for the disaster in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Now, Lewis, who was president during Hurricane Katrina?
That was Bush.
Okay. 28% of respondents believed that Bush was to blame for the disastrous response to Hurricane Katrina. 28% of respondents believed that Barack Obama, who was nobody at the time, was to blame for the terrible response to Hurricane Katrina. That provides some context as to the depravity of what we're dealing with here.
It is really incredible. We just have people who, maybe they work a lot. Maybe they're just very busy. They have children that they probably love and they have busy lives. Maybe they really, are there excuses? Is there any excuse for having this little information, this lack of knowledge?
I mean, there are plenty of excuses. Whether we think they're valid, I guess, is harder to say. What really we need to ingrain into our minds is, if you think that if you just explain to certain voters the logic of why they should do A instead of B or support candidate C instead of D, and if you think that, hey, listen, it's logical, I just have to explain it to them, that's not going to work. It's not going to matter, as these polls are telling us.
Probably not. Yes, it's a sad state of affairs here. And still, somehow, we had President Obama win 2 elections. So it can't be as perhaps it's not as bad as we're making it seem.
Yesterday, I told you that Donald Trump, presidential candidate Donald Trump running as a Republican, has been sort of throwing out a lot of ideas that Republicans should hate, but they seem not to care because they're just so taken with Donald Trump. One example was raising taxes for the rich, a completely non-Republican idea, but something that they seem to be okay with, at least some of them, when it comes to Donald Trump. There is a fascinating new poll from Huffington Post and YouGov, which surveyed 1,000 people. They took policy positions, and to half of the 1,000 people, they said, hey, do you support or not support President Obama's policy of doing A? And then they went to the other 500 and they said, do you support or not support Donald Trump's policy of doing A? Of course, they were the same policies. The idea was to see if, based on being told that it's the policy supported by Obama or Trump, the agreement would be different between Republicans and Democrats. And the numbers are stunning. Here is an example, okay? The question was asked, Barack Obama / Donald Trump, for sometimes they said Barack Obama, sometimes they said Donald Trump, has praised the idea of universal health care. Now, it's true that President Obama has praised it, even though ultimately he chose to go push Obamacare, and that is not universal health care. Donald Trump in the past has said universal health care seems like a good idea, although he's not making a huge part of this current campaign, but at some points in time, they've both praised the idea. Do you agree or disagree with Barack Obama or Donald Trump's view on universal health care? Listen to the numbers. When a Democrat was asked if they supported President Obama's universal health care praise, they said yes more than 80% of the time, okay? When a Democrat was asked if they support Donald Trump's universal health care plan, they said yes only 50-ish% of the time. On the Republican side, when a Republican was asked if they support President Obama's universal health care plan, they said yes only 16% of the time. But when Republicans were asked if they support Donald Trump's universal health care plan, they said yes 44% of the time. Stunning. Here's another example, affirmative action. President Obama believes there's a place for affirmative action. Donald Trump says he's fine with affirmative action. When Democrats were asked, do you support affirmative action like President Obama? 64% say yes. When Democrats were asked, do you support affirmative action like Donald Trump? 45% still said yes. Republicans were asked, do you support affirmative action like President Obama says? They said yes only 15% of the time, but that number more than doubled when they were told it's Donald Trump supporting affirmative action. So what can we deduce, Lewis, from these numbers?
Well, I would say that it seems, unfortunately, it seems that on one of these issues, there is a bigger difference in these percentage points on the Democratic side. So this could mean that the Democrats are even more close-minded than the Republicans.
Well, we certainly have to be open to the idea of cognitive bias here. And I'm very aware of this particular cognitive bias, which is forgetting about the content and looking only at the individual who's delivering it. I agree with Donald Trump, for example, that we should be taxing the rich a little bit more. That isn't going to confuse me into thinking that I agree with Donald Trump on much. I disagree with Donald Trump on building a wall between the US and Mexico across the entire border. Overall, I don't like Trump's policies. But if you ask me, do I support Trump's policy of raising taxes on the rich? I would have no problem saying, yeah, that policy makes sense to me. And I try to just be aware of this cognitive bias to avoid falling prey to it.
There are people on both sides guilty of it. We can clearly see that. It certainly seems that it matters more where your information, who is saying it, rather than the actual policy. But that's just, business as usual, I think.
Let's take a break. Send me your thoughts on this. I'm on Twitter, twitter.com/dpacman, and producer Lewis is on Twitter, twitter.com/LewisMotamedy.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today's new member of the day is Jamie Ainsley. Jamie, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. And it's a very special day to be member of the day because I have something really cool to announce. I've been going back and forth. We did this fundraising campaign last month. Actually, at this point, 2 months ago. And we've been sending out all the perks that people have selected. And I was in touch with someone who put together about $1,100 in donations. They had a whole bunch of perks selected. I emailed him and said, listen, I need your address. And he said, okay, I'm actually moving right now. I would allow you to not send me any of the perks if we can translate my $1,100 into more cash for the show sometime. So we brainstormed about how to do it, and we decided to turn those $1,100 into 35 half-price memberships. Normally, a membership is $60, and we can take those $1,100 and offer $30 towards 35 memberships. Normally, when we do this, we do an email blast first, and like half or 2/3 of the memberships are spoken for immediately, and people who then email in when they hear me talk about it on the show end up missing out. So we are not doing an email blast about this until later tonight or tomorrow. So if you would like a half-price membership, just email us. Go to davidpakman.com, click on Contact Us, and say, hey, David, I'd love one of the half-price memberships. Every membership that we do at half price takes $30 away from the pool that this donor is going to have to get physical perks. And he said, listen, I'm fine if the entire $1,100 ends up being spoken for. So if you're interested in the half-price membership, we have somebody who's saying, I'll pay for half of up to 35 memberships. Email me, and we will get you a code. This will be first come, first served. I expect these to go pretty quickly, as they often do. It's time for Hatriot Mail today.
Between waving a Gadsden's flag from a highway overpass to drafting George Zimmerman for a 2016 run, a patriot has little time for anything else. But when that annoying little dweeb, David Pakman, really pushes the liberal envelope beyond what a God-fearing teabagger can bear, there's Hatriot Mail.
Yep.
Your brief respite from the unending deluge of liberal bias.
Okay, so today's Hatriot Mail is Donald Trump related. It was only a matter of time until we started to get Donald Trump related Hatriot Mail. And here it is. Somebody doesn't like what we said about Trump.
Pakman, I always try to give you the benefit of the doubt, but you are a complete moron. Your manager's job, a Hardee's, still awaits you. Trump has run over 400 businesses successfully worldwide and negotiated with high-level officials. So you expect him to basically come out and give a definite answer in this military question without being prepped beforehand? Pakman, you are a schoolboy, and you will always be a schoolboy. To be successful in life, being constructive and positive are key assets. You have neither qualities, girlfriend.
Aside from the rampant grammatical errors, Lewis, there's always or often this attempt to sort of emasculate us in the Hatriot Mail, referring to saying girlfriend, or talking about sissy boys, or of course just making us out to be gay, which would be just terrible, Lewis, if one of us were gay, according to the Hatriots. So now we're seeing the Trump lovers come out of the woodwork. And what's interesting is the Trump lovers, the Trump Hatriots, seem to have the same sort of narrative when it comes to criticizing our show that most extremists have had over the last several years of Hatriot Mail. The narrative is very similar.
Yeah, Hatriots, no matter where they're coming from and no matter who they support, seem to have the same themes throughout their patriotism. And they're very consistent. They're a very consistent people, David.
Let's do a quick fact check of Donald Trump. Then we're going to move on to when the world is going to end. Cliff notes, it's going to be very, very soon, depending on who you ask. So during a recent Fox and Friends interview, Donald Trump talked about, as I mentioned, increasing taxes on the rich, which was a sort of divergence from the normal Republican talking points. But he also said that the United States is the most highly taxed nation in the world, adding that that's why we need to have taxes go down, business has to come back, jobs have to be brought back, talking about business taxes, presumably. PolitiFact looked at Donald Trump's claim that we're already the most highly taxed country in the world, and they evaluated it in two ways. One is how much tax revenue represents as a share of gross domestic product, and number two is tax revenue per capita. Both of these measures are calculated by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So, by using measure number 1, taxes account for about 25% of the U.S. gross domestic product. If it sounds really high, I'll tell you that it ranked the U.S. 27th out of 30th from the developed countries included in the study. One of the lowest tax rates is the one in the U.S. when evaluated as a percentage of the GDP. Does that surprise you, Lewis?
It really doesn't surprise me at all. We have billionaires, millionaires, companies, gigantic companies paying nothing in taxes. So no, this doesn't really surprise me.
Using this metric, the 5 countries with the highest percentages of taxes as a share of GDP are Denmark, France, Belgium, Finland, and Sweden. Okay. When looking at a different measure, which is tax revenue per capita, the U.S. is slightly higher, but still very far from the top. The taxes per capita in the United States total $13,482. This ranked the U.S. 16th out of 29 countries for which that data was available 2 years ago. The 5 highest per capita tax numbers were Luxembourg, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, and Switzerland. So again, Lewis, in both measures, according to both metrics, Donald Trump is flat wrong that this is one of the most taxed countries in the world, or even in the developed world.
And there is still a huge difference between 16th and 1st. We're talking about 13,000 per capita to almost 50,000 per capita. And so, I just wanted to state that. And to think that we even needed to do a study, I mean, if you want to know where we stand, that's good. But I think people who know about the world we live in would never assume that we are even close to the top when it comes to taxes.
Let me tell you something else, Lewis. When we look at the most developed countries, the U.S. is somewhere in the middle towards the bottom. When you look at a comparison that includes 115 countries, the U.S. ranked 103rd out of 115 in terms of how low the tax rates is, or I guess in terms of they were 12th lowest out of 115 countries in terms of taxation as a percentage of GDP. The more countries you include in the comparison, the more wrong that Donald Trump is. And the scary part is, if you have a fundamental misunderstanding of something so simple, and then you're going to make decisions about taxation, that's really scary. We may have different economic philosophies, but we at least need to be basing our opinions on the right data. If Donald Trump doesn't even have the right data on taxation, there is no chance he's going to make reasonable decisions.
And why is he saying this right after saying that we should tax the rich more? It's kind of strange.
It's
unless
just
he
this
wants
disjointed
to take,
stuff, yeah.
He is, but if he wants to take some of this burden off the middle class, then please, by all means.
If you've been missing hearing from Pat Robertson from the 700 Club, he is back with a completely casual cataclysmic prediction, saying that the world is going to end very soon. Someone wrote in asking if the world would end on September 23rd, which is, I guess, another date that some evangelists say the world will end. And here was Pat Robertson's response.
One more question.
Mike says, I keep hearing about a bunch of stuff that's supposed to happen on September 23rd. How much of this should I believe, and where do you think we are in regards to prophecy? You got 30 seconds.
I think, the clock is down to 11:59. I think that things are getting ready to wrap up. We've got Jonathan Kahn, who talks about Shemitah. He's coming in another few days, and maybe he can clarify some of the things he's been writing. But I do think the earth is hurtling toward some final conclusion. We all feel that.
I love the casual language, Lewis. Pat Robertson saying totally casually, things are getting ready to wrap up soon. Total destruction, the final conclusion, all that stuff. It's going to be pretty soon. Seemingly completely unaffected by it.
And the same crap that people like Pat Robertson have been spewing for over 2,000 years. The end is always coming. So go to church, keep paying your tithe, and keep sending money to Pat Robertson.
And remember, in late 1976, Pat Robertson predicted the end of the world was coming in either October or November of 1982. Obviously, that didn't happen. In September 2011, Robertson and several others incorrectly predicted these end of the world dates, they were awarded an IG Nobel Prize for teaching the world to be careful when making mathematical assumptions and calculations. I love that. Some other failed prophecies from Pat Robertson. In 2006, he predicted that hurricanes would ravage the coasts of the United States. There were 0 hurricanes touching the coasts of the United States that year. And there was also that time when God told Pat Robertson that Jay Rockefeller was going to be elected president. That didn't happen. And people still follow this man.
People do. I enjoy listening to him, but I think for very different reasons than most of his followers.
When we watch Pat Robertson, we sort of operate under the assumption that there's one of those disclaimers that says, for entertainment purposes only. The problem is a lot of people watch Pat Robertson, and since that disclaimer isn't actually part of his show, they're not watching for entertainment purposes. They're watching because they buy in, to the point where they send this guy money.
And not just his show, I think the entire channel needs to be riddled with these disclaimers, and we should probably put them in some religious text as well.
After the break, in what ways is Planned Parenthood like ISIS? I don't know, but Mike Huckabee claims to.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Former Arkansas Republican Governor Mike Huckabee, he's also a presidential candidate who has absolutely no chance of winning the Republican nomination, was interviewed on Newsmax TV. And he said that Planned Parenthood is kind of like terrorists who behead people. So I guess the reference is to ISIS. Here's his explanation of why they're the same, Lewis.
Total double standard. And it was also a double standard when she was talking about Planned Parenthood and that Republicans are like terrorists. I'll tell you what terrorists do. Terrorists take people's heads off. That's what they do. Planned Parenthood takes the heads off of unborn children and sells the body parts.
Absolutely.
So if you want to talk about what is most like a terrorist, is it a Republican trying to save a human life, or is it Planned Parenthood murdering human life and selling the body parts as if they were selling parts of a car?
Mike Huckabee made a similar comparison between Planned Parenthood and ISIS at a campaign stop in Iowa last week. I was thinking about how ridiculous fools like Huckabee sound, but then I had a sort of epiphany. It's not that Huckabee sounds like an idiot to everybody. There's a contingent of people that hears Huckabee talk and they don't realize that he's a fool. And these people vote. They hear him say, well, listen, ISIS beheads people and Planned Parenthood was caught in that sting, which has now been totally debunked, as selling fetal parts. So they're kind of the same. Yeah, that kind of does make sense. There's people who hear Huckabee say this stuff and they don't react the way they should, which is, this is a dangerous, dangerous extremist.
And there are millions of people who, if there were no other Christians in the Republican primary, would only vote for Mike Huckabee because he's a Christian. There are those voters. What are you going to do? That's the U.S.
The absurdity of these ideas that we hear from people like Huckabee is that there actually is a huge similarity between Huckabee's beliefs and ISIS beliefs. You know who else is against gay marriage and abortion, Mike? ISIS. You know who's also into subjugating women as a matter of daily life, much like right-wing Christians in the United States? ISIS. You know who wants a system of government based on their self-professed religious dogma? Right-wing Christians and ISIS. There's a total lack of self-awareness amongst these folks that is really indicative of how both hypocritical, arbitrary, and ignorant their entire worldview is.
It's like two high schools in the same town that have like a rivalry, a football team rivalry. Although everything's basically the same, and you live in the same place, but for some reason this intense rivalry exists.
Is the silver lining that Huckabee has no chance of being president?
Perhaps. Yeah, I don't know why he keeps trying. He's already had a failed attempt. It's completely futile, but if he enjoys it, good for him.
Well, I think it definitely helps him to build his email list, and we know he sells that list to offer all sorts of scam and quack medical cures. So he's probably going to come out very much ahead financially from this thing.
Maybe. It's hard to say. I'm sure there's plenty of profiteering to do, I guess.
Let's talk a little bit about the NFL and Will Smith and concussions in football. We've been talking for years, Lewis, about CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is this condition that affects the brains of football players. I recommended a little while ago a documentary called League of Denial, which talks about Bennett Omalu, among others. Bennett Omalu, a doctor who is the actual forensic pathologist in Pittsburgh, who first discovered CTE in football players. And the documentary, League of Denial, very specifically outlines all of the techniques that the NFL used trying to strong arm Omalu to suppress the data and so much else. Will Smith is now going to star in a Hollywood movie named Concussion, where he will play Dr. Bennett Omalu. This is definitely a film that is going to anger the NFL.
I found a disease that no one has ever seen. Repetitive head trauma chokes the brain.
The NFL does not want to talk to you. You turned on the lights and gave their biggest boogeyman a name.
You're going to war with a corporation that owns a day of the week.
No proof was presented today because there simply isn't any.
They have to listen to us. This is bigger than they are.
What you think they're doing to you now? That's nothing. You have no idea how bad this could get.
I have to keep going.
They want you to say you made it all up.
If they continue to deny my work, men continue to die.
Sometimes in life, you're asked to leave it alone. But sometimes you can't.
Who are you? Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
So, Lewis, when you saw the trailer, when you read about this, this is a story that you follow. What are you expecting the NFL to do as far as a PR campaign in response to what is a film that, while yes, it is adding dramatics to the real world story, it's still presenting a real world story that many people don't know about, which is that football is really, really bad for people's brains?
I don't really know what the NFL can do. I imagine they might have an ad campaign or start some programs like they have before involving safety and trying to make it seem more safe. But some emails just came out that made it clear that because out of fear of what the NFL might do, Sony has kind of taken things out of the movie and dumbed it down, taken the bite out of the movie. Still, the whole thing is about how this is terrible for the brain. So it's going to be a big blow, I think, to the NFL.
And one of the leaked emails Lewis is referencing is from a public relations firm that represents Will Smith, the star of the movie, written to Sony. And they wrote, quote, "Concussion is going to piss off the NFL. We should not try to pretend otherwise. Moreover, there is no concession we could make short of agreeing to cancel the project entirely that could possibly satisfy them. Our strategy should thus be based on the assumption that we are going to be facing a powerful adversary that may try to prevent the movie from being made, and failing that, to ensure that as few people as possible see it or take it seriously." So I think that the NFL response will be, listen, this is a Hollywood movie. They figured out a way to make it very dramatic, and you need good guys and bad guys in these types of movies, but it's making extra scientific claims that are not backed by medical data. Look over here. Look at Tim Tebow praying before games. That's really what the focus should be. It's wholesome family fun. But ultimately, Lewis, I am convinced that this is going to completely blow up. The more parents know about this, the more they are going to say no to their kids when they want to play high school football. That will affect college football, which will affect the NFL.
Yeah, I think it will have an impact. Goodell and the NFL will probably continue the narrative that this isn't science-based, and they'll continue to cover it up. I would suggest that instead of watching this movie, which, you know, it might be okay, watch the Frontline documentary, League of Denial. It's pretty much the exact story, and it's probably a lot more informative.
I would probably be interested, having seen League of Denial, in seeing Concussion anyway, just to see how do you take. I mean, it's interesting because it's a current medical situation that is being dealt with? How is that taken and turned into a movie? So I am definitely curious about the film, but if you're either going to see Concussion or League of Denial, I would encourage you to see League of Denial. It's available on Netflix, it's on Amazon, it's elsewhere. Hugely important. And I remain convinced, Lewis, that football is going to be impacted by this. I don't know how soon, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, it will happen. It's still such a popular sport, the most popular sport in the United States. I think it will still be here for quite some time.
Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
NASA is moving forward with a new sort of experiment or study to look at the feasibility of life on Mars. There's a team of NASA recruits who are going to, or have already started to, live in a dome near a barren volcano in Hawaii to simulate what it would be like to live on Mars. And this is an isolation experience. It's going to last 1 year. This is the longest of its type attempted so far. Experts are estimating that a human mission to Mars could take between 1 and 3 years. The team of 6 will live in closed quarters under the dome. They will not have much privacy. They will not have fresh food. A journey outside of the dome, which is only 36 feet in diameter and 20 feet tall, will require a spacesuit. There's a French astrobiologist, a German physicist, and 4 Americans, a pilot, an architect, a journalist, and a soil scientist, making up the 6-person team. Each person will get a small sleeping cot, and they will also have a desk inside their rooms. Their provisions include powdered cheese, Lewis, and canned tuna. Currently, missions to the to the International Space Station last 6 months. But they have been doing some longer isolated missions lately. And this is really a mission to focus on the psychology of it, because there are other missions focusing on the technical challenges, the scientific challenges, etc. This is really to see what will the isolation be like. It's not actually a totally sealed dome. There are fans there that can bring in fresh air if there are certain variables met outside of the set limit. So the technical side of it is not really the big one being tested. It's more the psychological. And that's a huge factor if humans are going to undertake these missions.
I think you'd agree with me that this sounds pretty miserable.
Yeah.
I would have no interest in doing this, but it is a necessary experiment. And there have been others like it. And I think generally people can handle it, but it does make them pretty miserable.
And you have to remember, Lewis, that even though you can test the isolation this way, everybody there knows that if the integrity of their dome is breached, there's perfectly breathable air outside, right? So we can't really figure out what the impact would be of knowing that you're also at risk of death if there's any puncture, right? And it'll tell us some things about the psychological impact, but not even everything.
That's true. And we still have not really had an experiment that is all encompassing. I mean, factor in the 1 to 3 year journey. Let's say a 1 year journey to Mars. That's even more isolated than you'd be in this dome.
Yeah.
And then living on Mars for the rest of your life. I mean, we just really have no idea what this will do to people.
Hey, have you heard of the idea of making diesel out of thin air? There are small companies in Germany and Canada that are capturing carbon dioxide and finding ways to convert it and sell it. A German company, Sunfire, produced its first batch of e-diesel a few months ago. And there's also a Canadian company called Carbon Engineering, which just built a pilot plant to suck 1 to 2 tons of carbon dioxide out of the air per day and turn it into 500 liters of diesel. The process does require electricity, and the electricity may well be coming from fossil fuels, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. Fossil fuels, the chemistry is as follows. You split water into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis. Then you add hydrogen to the carbon dioxide to make carbon monoxide and water. And then you add more hydrogen to build up hydrocarbon chains. There's nothing new about this technique scientifically. The Fischer-Tropsch process dates back to the 1920s. And as I mentioned, electricity is still a factor because the electricity required to do this could be coming from coal. But we've talked about that before, Lewis. The idea is we start taking steps up the renewability ladder, so to speak. Eventually, the electricity itself could also come from a renewable source. This is very interesting. It's not a new technique scientifically, and there are thoughts that by the time this is really fully developed, we'll have way better methods that don't need diesel anyway, so that this could end up being a lot of moot work, but it is still very interesting.
Yeah, I'm not too excited about this. I mean, we're using plants that are the dirty energy plants to create something to burn, and so it's fine. It's interesting technology, but I just don't really care. We need to be focusing on things we have available right now, and there's just not much of a will to do that.
Okay, but so what energy technologies do make you excited?
So many countries are just having great advancements with wind power right now. I mean, why aren't we doing more with that? We just seem unwilling to do it. That's one thing we could be doing.
That is true, but when we're think about this application is very different. Yes, you can generate electricity with wind power, but and then I guess you could have an electric car which is powered by wind-generated electricity. But the power generating capacity of that is very different than burning diesel, as we know. So if you could generate diesel out of thin air by adding renewably produced electricity, that's very different than saying, yeah, I can power my house with solar or wind. Although I agree with you that broadly speaking, solar and wind are huge areas of opportunity.
That's true. It's still a step in the right direction. But yeah, I'm not going to do a backflip over this one, Dave.
Thank you. No, we wouldn't want you doing that. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's the Eggman checking in.
Shalom, Pac-Man. Hey, I've said this before. I believe Trump is a liberal, and he is actually the least offensive Republican running right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. There's people who have said that Trump is actually a liberal at heart and that this is all sort of just a show, and this is why he seems to be flip-flopping constantly on stuff like whether or not he's religious, whether or not he's for or against a woman's right to choose what medical procedures are right for her, etc. But you're not the only one who thinks that, Eggman. And then here's something great. We received that song the other day, and we weren't sure, Lewis, if it was actually a song about us or not. We got another song from the same person, and now it is very clear it's about us because he talks about David P. and Lewis. Take a listen to this.
David P. and Mr. Lewis are far out. Oh, that's true, that's true. Trying to teach the right-wing lunatics truth. Trump wouldn't know a Bible if it bit him in his wallet. Ow, ow, ow. Is that my hair? Is that my hair? Give me a J, give me an E, give me a B. What's that spell, Jebby? What kind of ability taking no traction? Cruz looks like Grandpa Monster from the Monster.
Anyway, you get the idea. This is really very well produced. It reminds me of the type of thing that this guy Sour Shoes would do who calls into the Howard Stern show. It's that type of thing. I love this. I wish there were more songs like this. We could definitely use some of these somewhere within the show, I'm sure. But this is very good stuff.
We need to know more about who is creating these songs, and I just want to know about everything that's happening here. We don't have much information.
Yeah, the tune was the same to this song as the previous song. So I wonder if this is just a basic framework that this individual uses to make songs about anything, or are they able to create things that sound different? I'm fascinated by the entire thing, and I would love to know more. On the bonus show today, Texas cops shoot a man with his hands up. President Obama goes to Alaska, and we have a couple of updates. Lewis has a story. I'm going to follow up about the dog story from a couple of weeks prior and a lot more. DavidPakman.com/membership and 35 half-priced memberships available. Email us, davidpakman.com. Click on Contact Us and say, hey, David, I would like one of those half-price memberships. We will get you the codes on a first-come, first-served basis, and then you will be able to listen to and watch the bonus show. Very exciting. Lewis is the host. I'm the sidekick. Speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.